Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So just real quick before I get into the stories that I want to talk about, want to give a quick update on how the diet is going. I started it on Friday, and so this is the fourth full day of the diet. So there's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So this is the fourth full day, which means that I've weighed myself each day. The beginning weight, what I weighed on Friday was 309.5 pounds. Today I stepped on the scale this morning, 303.5. So I've already lost 6 pounds basically in 3 days. And I'm not going to, every time I do a show, give you an update on how the diet's going. But, since it's been a weekend, I figured I'd give an update. I might give an update in about another week and a half. But it's been a lot easier than I expected to stick with the thing. And again, it's not a rigorous plan. I don't have it written down, and if I deviate from the plan, I don't give myself 50 lashes or anything. But basically, I'm trying to pretty much eat fruits and what vegetables I do like. So I've been eating some sweet potatoes, and I've found a really nice way to make sweet potatoes that are a little bit different than how you would normally make them. So if you want to know about that, just send me an email, Darryl at fppradio.com. I will shoot you over the recipe for what I'm calling loaded sweet potato fries, and everything on there is good for you. So I've been doing that generally for one of the meals, either a lunch or a supper, and I've been drinking a smoothie for a meal, and there's really been only one day where I've actually had a third meal, and what I did that day was I ate some crab legs and some shrimp. So, it's a diet where I'm eating crab legs and shrimp and eating sweet potatoes and drinking smoothies that are really good. They're very tasty. So just wanted to give that update on how that was going. Now, something that I definitely want to talk about is something that you don't hear very often. A prosecutor basically apologizing for something that they have done. And I'll read the entire story here in just a bit. But before I do, I want to read a story about the man in Ohio, Ricky Jackson, who was recently cleared of murder after having spent 39 years in prison, many of those years on death row. And, there's more good news for Ricky Jackson. Last Thursday, the Ohio Court of Claims, and yes, that's the actual name of it. It's not the Ohio Claims Court. It's the Ohio Court of Claims, on Thursday ordered the state to pay just over $1 million to Ricky Jackson, who to date has been the longest held prisoner in the United States to eventually be cleared of a crime. Jackson, who, according to the Cleveland Plains Dealer, said that he learned about the payment from a journalist, said, wow, that's fantastic, man. I don't even know what to say. This is going to mean so much. So the backstory here for Jackson was that he, along with Wiley Bridgman and Bridgman's brother Kwame Ajamu, were all convicted of a 1975 murder of a money order salesman in the Cleveland area. The murdered man was Harold Franks. The lone witness in the case, or at least I believe it was the lone witness in the case, was a 12-year-old boy who testified saying that he saw the attack. That boy, Eddie Vernon, later recanted his testimony and told authorities he never actually witnessed the crime. There was no other evidence linking Jackson to the killing. Other witnesses confirmed the then teenage Jackson was actually on a school bus at the time of the killing. He had originally been sentenced to death but escaped because of a paperwork error. Bridgman was freed soon after Jackson after the charges were dismissed last November, although Bridgman had first been released in 2002. He was later imprisoned for a probation violation. A Cleveland judge in December dropped all charges against Ajamu, who spent 27 years in jail before having his death sentence commuted and being freed in 2003. The 39 years that Jackson spent in jail was the longest time a prisoner has been held before being exonerated. The Ohio Innocence Project, which provided legal counsel to Jackson, and the National Registry of Exonerations are the ones that did the fact-checking on that to verify that he has served the longest amount of time of anyone who was later exonerated for the crime. Now, there are some people that are up in arms over this, saying that Jackson deserves more money. Because the $1 million, and I did some calculations here, the $1 million that he spent in prison for 39 years equates to just over $70 per day. Now, do you think that it's right that he should get $70 per day that he was incarcerated? Because if you do calculations in other ways to try to determine how much money would he have made over those 39 years, would it equate to $1 million? Well, that really depends on what kind of job he was doing, what sort of pay he was receiving. Maybe he would have actually earned over $1 million, maybe not. And then there's the argument of, well, wait a second, this guy was already housed for 39 years. He received all of these taxpayer benefits. Why should he get additional funds from taxpayers? And I'm going to make the argument here for why he should receive the money, because he was wrongly incarcerated. In a free society where everything is funded voluntarily, if someone is incarcerated incorrectly, so on false allegations, somebody winds up going into a privately funded jail, then I believe that that person would be owed restitution at the date of their release. And I believe that it would probably be more than $70 per day. I don't know what that number would be. I don't know what the number should be, but $70 seems a little low to me. Something else that seems a little low to me is the $30 per day that is being offered to a Louisiana man who was freed after spending 30 years in prison. The story here comes from the Shreveport Times, and this is actually an editorial that leads up to a letter from the prosecutor who basically apologizes for having done his job. And I'll get into this when we come back and tell you about the $30 per day that is being offered to Glenn Ford, who spent 30 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. When we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. The Doublespeak Dictionary by Leslie Starr O'Hara satirizes the marked difference between the ideal of we the people and the reality of we the elite, while offering an insightful glimpse into the clockworks of the totalitarian mind. Ever irreverent but never irrelevant, the Doublespeak Dictionary serves as a subversive and humorous but timely reminder that the emperor has no clothes. The Doublespeak Dictionary is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. ExpressCoin is the best choice for buying Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, and more. ExpressCoin prides themselves on their customer service, so much so that the back end on the website should allow them to be even more focused on your needs. Get your cryptocurrencies with money order, check, wire transfer, or cash deposit. Get started at expresscoin.fppradio.com. That's expresscoin.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So the reason that I want to read this editorial from the Shreveport Times before reading you the letter from attorney Marty Stroud is because Marty Stroud's letter is in response to the editorial. And there's actually an editor's note. Let me read you the editor's note that precedes the letter to the editor from Marty Stroud, who, again, he was the attorney who prosecuted Glenn Ford. Editor's note. Attorney A.M. Marty Stroud III of Shreveport was the lead prosecutor in the December 1984 first-degree murder trial of Glenn Ford, who was sentenced to death for the November 5th, 1983 death of a Shreveport jeweler, Isidore Roseman. Ford was released from prison March 11th, 2014, after the state admitted new evidence proving Ford was not the killer. Stroud is responding to an editorial in the March 6th edition of the Times that urged the state to now give Ford justice by not fighting compensation allowed for those wrongly convicted. So here is the editorial that really needs to be read before fully understanding everything mentioned in the letter to the editor by Marty Stroud. The editorial begins, "The state of Louisiana is giving former death row inmate Glenn Ford a raw deal again. The first time apparently happened December 5th, 1985, when Ford was wrongly convicted and sentenced in the November 5th, 1983 shooting death of Isidore Roseman, a 56-year-old Shreveport jeweler. Ford, who has always maintained his innocence in the killing, was finally allowed to go free at Angola on March 11th, 2014, after the Caddo District Attorney's Office asked a Caddo District Judge to vacate his conviction and sentence. The action came in the wake of information about the real Roseman triggerman being secured during an unrelated homicide investigation in 2013. Now the state is saying Ford is not entitled to benefit from the law that allows wrongfully convicted individuals to receive compensation for their time behind bars. There is a specific criteria that must be met before there is a payout, and the Louisiana Attorney General's Office says Ford should not receive the compensation because he cannot prove he is factually innocent." The editorial says, "Hogwash. To us, it sounds like the state is playing a game of semantics. The basic fact remains the state wrongly convicted Ford of this crime and then sentenced him to die, apparently on evidence that could not withstand the revelations from the 2013 investigation. No matter how you dress it, in the end, the state was wrong in Ford's case. Ford should have never been convicted, much less sentenced to die, and Ford now should be compensated for having lost 30 years of his life. It's simple, and it's right." Thus far in the case, the state attorney general's office has filed a motion opposing Ford's request for $105,000, representing the first payout of a possible $330,000 compensation package outlined by state law for wrongfully convicted individuals meeting statutory requirements. Ford's attorney, Kristen Winstrom of the Innocence Project in New Orleans, points out it was the state's disregard of evidence in the first place that resulted in Ford's death sentence. A ruling on Ford's compensation request was deferred during a February 5th hearing before Caddo Parish Judge Catherine Doreau. A ruling was expected within 30 days, but has not happened. And even if the ruling is in favor of Ford, an appeal is likely, which would further delay the compensation due to Ford. Of course, the real tragic issue here is that Ford doesn't have time for such delays because he now finds himself sitting on another kind of death row. He has been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and on February 23rd, doctors told him he is only expected to live for 4 to 8 more months. Ford, who is 65, realizes the possibility of getting the money before he succumbs to his cancer is slim, but would like to explore the possibility of passing the compensation onto his family if he's not alive to receive it. Not only should that be allowed, but it seems the state should be obligated in seeing to that. After all, it was their incorrect action that took him away from his family for the last 30 years. Ford told the Shreveport Times in a recent interview, "I want to leave everything to my grandkids." The editorial continues, "We don't understand why the state is fighting this matter so hard. Certainly, Louisiana stole 30 years of Ford's life that he will never again regain. And $330,000 seems like a small amount to at least give this man and his family a small indication that we are sorry that this was allowed to even happen. Obviously, our justice system failed to get the right man in this instance. Now Louisiana should do the right thing and compensate Ford for what was done to him in the name of Louisiana justice, and it should be put on the fast track. That would be real justice in this case." So I feel obligated to have read that before I read you the letter from attorney Marty Stroud III, who was the prosecutor that saw Glenn Ford not only get convicted, but sentenced to die. The letter begins, "This is the first and probably will be the last time that I have publicly voiced an opinion on any of your editorials. Quite frankly, I believe many of your editorials avoid the hard questions on a current issue in order to not be too controversial. I congratulate you here, though, because you have taken a clear stand on what needs to be done in the name of justice. Glenn Ford should be completely compensated to every extent possible because of the flaws of a system that effectively destroyed his life. The audacity of the state's efforts to deny Mr. Ford any compensation for the horrors he suffered in the name of Louisiana justice is appalling. I know of what I speak. I was at the trial of Glenn Ford from beginning to end. I witnessed the imposition of the death sentence upon him. I believed that justice was done. I had done my job. I was one of the prosecutors, and I was proud of what I had done. The death sentence had illustrated that our community would brook no tolerance for cold-blooded killers. The Old Testament admonishment, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was alive and well in Caddo Parish. I even received a congratulatory note from one of the state's witnesses, concluding with the question, how does it feel to be wearing a black glove? Members of the victim's family profusely thanked the prosecutor and investigators for our efforts. They had received some closure, or so everyone thought. However, due to the hard work and dedication of lawyers working with the Capitol Post Conviction Project of Louisiana, along with the efforts of the Caddo Parish District Attorneys and Sheriff's offices, the truth was uncovered. And I'll finish this letter to the editor from the attorney who is apologizing for having, quote-unquote, done his job when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Coinbase has more than 1 million consumer wallets and is trusted by over 25,000 merchants, including Overstock.com, Khan Academy, Reddit, and of course, FPP. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So I'm in the middle of the letter to the editor from attorney Marty Stroud III, who was the lead prosecutor in the murder conviction of Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford, 30 years later, was exonerated and released from prison in Louisiana. And Marty Stroud is apologizing for essentially having done his job. And I hate even using the term having done his job, but that's what he was hired to do. And he even mentions about, I had done my job. But he is apologizing. And I feel that when something like this happens, it is my duty to report on it and to not give you excerpts of the letter, but to read the entire thing. So I continue. Marty Stroud writes, Glenn Ford was an innocent man. He was released from the hellhole he had endured for the last 3 decades. There was no technicality here. Crafty lawyering did not secure the release of a criminal. Mr. Ford spent 30 years of his life in a small, dingy cell. His surroundings were dire. Lighting was poor. Heating and cooling were almost non-existent. Food bordered on the uneatable. Nobody wanted to be accused of coddling a death row inmate. But Mr. Ford never gave up. He continued the fight for his innocence, and it finally paid off. Pursuant to the review and investigation of cold homicide cases, investigators uncovered evidence that exonerated Mr. Ford. Indeed, this evidence was so strong that had it been disclosed during the investigation, there would not have been sufficient evidence to even arrest Glenn Ford. And yet, despite this grave injustice, the state does not accept any responsibility for the damage suffered by one of its citizens. The bureaucratic response appears to be that nobody did anything intentionally wrong, thus the state has no responsibility. This is nonsensical. Explain that position to Mr. Ford and his family. Facts are stubborn things. They do not go away. At the time this case was tried, there was evidence that would have cleared Glenn Ford. The easy and convenient argument is that the prosecutors did not know of such evidence. Thus, they were absolved of any responsibility for the wrongful conviction. I can take no comfort in such an argument. As a prosecutor and officer of the court, I had the duty to prosecute fairly. While I could properly strike hard blows, ethically I could not strike foul ones. Part of my duty was to disclose promptly any exculpatory evidence related to trial and penalty issues of which I was made aware. My fault was that I was too passive. I did not consider the rumors about the involvement of parties other than Mr. Ford to be credible, especially since the 3 others who were indicted for the crime were ultimately released for lack of sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Had I been more inquisitive, perhaps the evidence would have come to light years ago, but I wasn't, and my inaction contributed to the miscarriage of justice in this matter. Based on what we had, I was confident that the right man was being prosecuted, and I was not going to commit resources to investigate what I considered to be bogus claims that we had the wrong man. My mindset was wrong and blinded me to my purpose of seeking justice rather than obtaining a conviction of a person who I believe to be guilty. I did not hide evidence. I simply did not seriously consider that sufficient information may have been out there that could have led to a different conclusion, and that omission is on me. Furthermore, my silence at trial undoubtedly contributed to the wrong-headed result. I did not question the unfairness of Mr. Ford having appointed counsel who had never tried a criminal jury case, much less a capital one. It never concerned me that the defense had insufficient funds to hire experts or that the defense counsel shut down their firms for substantial periods of time to prepare for trial. These attorneys tried their very best, but they were in the wrong arena. They were excellent attorneys with experience in civil matters, but this did not prepare them for trying to save the life of Mr. Ford. The jury was all white. Mr. Ford is African American. Potential African American jurors were struck with little thought about potential discrimination because at that time, a claim of racial discrimination in the selection of jurors could not be successful unless it could be shown that the office had engaged in a pattern of such conduct in other cases. And I knew this was a very burdensome requirement that had never been met in the jurisprudence of which I was aware. I also participated in placing before the jury dubious testimony from a forensics pathologist that the shooter had to be left-handed, even though there was no eyewitness to the murder, and yes, Glenn Ford is left-handed. All too late, I learned that the testimony was pure junk science at its evil worst. In 1984, I was 33 years old. I was arrogant, judgmental, narcissistic, and very full of myself. I was not as interested in justice as I was in winning. To borrow a phrase from Al Pacino in the movie And Justice for All, winning became everything. After the death verdict in the Ford trial, I went out with others and celebrated with a few rounds of drinks. That's sick. I had been entrusted with the duty to seek the death of a fellow human being, a very solemn task that certainly did not warrant any celebration. In my rebuttal argument during the penalty phase of the trial, I mocked Mr. Ford, stating that this man wanted to stay alive so he could be given the opportunity to prove his innocence. I continued by saying that this should be an affront to each of you as jurors, for he showed no remorse, only contempt for your verdict. How totally wrong I was. I speak only for me and no one else. I apologize to Glenn Ford for all the misery I have caused him and his family. I apologize to the family of Mr. Roseman for giving them the false hope of some closure. I apologize to the member of the jury. I apologize to the members of the jury for not having all of the story that should have been disclosed to them. I apologize to the court in not having been more diligent in my duty to ensure that proper disclosure of any exculpatory evidence had been provided to the defense. Glenn Ford deserves every penny owed to him under the compensation statute. This case is another example of the arbitrariness of the death penalty. I now realize all too painfully that as a young 33-year-old prosecutor, I was not capable of making a decision that could have led to the killing of another human being. No one should be given the ability to impose a sentence of death in any criminal proceeding. We are simply incapable of devising a system that can fairly and impartially impose a sentence of death because we are all fallible human beings. The clear reality is that the death penalty is an anathema to any society that purports to call itself civilized. It is an abomination that continues to scar the fiber of this society, and it will continue to do so until this barbaric penalty is outlawed. Until then, we live in a land that condones state-assisted revenge, and that is not justice in any form or fashion. I end with the hope that Providence will have more mercy for me than I showed Glenn Ford, but I am also sobered by the realization that I certainly am not deserving of it. This has been Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Tune in again Wednesday. Don't forget, there's the Ask Me Anything where I answer your questions. AMA@FPPradio.com.